Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers. It's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It is the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. All right, so now let's get wall to wall, treetop tall, back into the ring, back into time with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey Ron, how do you celebrate 300 episodes?
Oh, wow, man. I guess you just say, darn, I'm glad to be here. You know? Wow, that's quite a while, man. It's pretty amazing. Didn't think we were going to get there for a while. I don't think I ever dreamed we'd be doing that. So
I remember when you and I were sitting in the woods on my back porch and you were talking about starting a podcast. And I was like, wow, okay, that would be cool. I had no idea. I bet you had no idea you would still be doing this thing almost 6 years later.
Yeah, I mean, this is just outrageous, but I like it. I enjoy it, and it keeps me busy, and also, it's a great way to reminisce, I guess,
Absolutely, and you've always talked about writing a book. You've already written one novel, Brutus, of course, but you've always talked about writing a book about wrestling, and maybe this is just the read or oral version of that.
Yeah. I think that's what it is, actually, Dave. I think this is this is the beginning of a book, and I won't have to do much research, I don't guess. Not on the first part, anyway.
Exactly. Hey, listen, I tell you, wrestling fans all over the world are really enjoying these Studcasts. Congratulations, by the way. I mean, again, you've been telling weekly for almost 6 years, reached another milestone now, 300 episodes that you've been telling this unique story of your family's life, really from the early 1900s as the largest and one of the oldest families in professional wrestling. Truly, absolutely remarkable. We really love the ride every week. So how do you feel about this 300th? Have you really thought about it? Have much time to?
No, not really, to be honest with you, I never thought it like I was about to say, when I did that first Studcast, man, we were on your back porch. That was about the time I started the first one.
Yeah. I
was only planning to tell a few stories about my grandfather starting back in 1902 and with him when he was born. And we might talk about the tough life he had growing up and how he got into wrestling. And that's about all I thought that might happen here, man.
A little storytelling that turned into all this. And listen, I really love those first 5 Studcasts because when you were talking about it, I thought, I got to hear what this is going to be like. Roy's story is absolutely amazing. And so is all of your family members since, no doubt. Now, 300 episodes later, you're into 1979 in your career. For me, that was kind of a sweet spot in wrestling for me as a fan, too, as a younger guy. So I don't know if all the listeners are really aware, but every Studcast, every single one ever done, is on your website. You could go there right now, listen to start with episode 1 if you want to. It's going to take you 300 hours to catch up where we are today. But listen, it's all there at tnstud.com, tnstud.com. So listen, what you've done so far in these Studcasts, maybe the best historical account of professional wrestling ever done. I can't think of anybody, anywhere, anybody else that is doing exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't believe there is probably anybody doing that. And I don't know, man, there's thousands of books out there and historical documents out there. But I'll tell you what, I'm well on my way to recording the entire history of the oldest and the largest professional wrestling family ever. That's for sure.
And I'm assuming that is why you called this one. This episode, number 300, is called My Life in 1979 at a Turning Point.
Yeah, you know, it's very fitting, man, that we are on Studcast number 300. That number is, a turning point. The basic number of 300 is a turning point. And when I look back, so was my life at that time in 1979. I'd accomplished a great deal for a young guy. At that point, I'd started my first and then my second wrestling companies. I was not only the youngest member of the National Wrestling Alliance in its history, but the only member to own 2 territories. So I had a great business relationship with the NWA president, Sam Muchnick, who I'd wrestled for in 1973 and 1974 in his St. Louis territory. I also had, and this is a guy that we had just talked about lately and is really highly involved, I also had a great business relationship with the NWA champion, Harley Race. And even more important to me, though, was I had a great personal relationship with both of them. I really, really liked that fact.
Wow.
Not only did I have 2 territories, but both of them had basically become very successful. The oldest one, southeastern Knoxville, in just over 5 years. It was at this point in 1979 recognized by many as the best small territory in the history of wrestling, professional wrestling. And the new one, southeastern Gulf Coast, less than 2 years old, had rose basically from the ashes of a dead territory, and with the help of some tremendous young stars and great wrestlers, was on its way to making history as well. All this, and Dave, I was only 31 years old, man.
I was going to say you'd barely passed 30 years of age by that time, and when you came in to the southeastern Gulf Coast territory, I was a part of that, and it was like, wow, what is going on? Who is this guy? And it didn't take long before we realized who this guy was. Listen, I don't think many people know or even consider that fact that at barely 30 years of age, you were 31, as you said, in just over 5 years as a promoter and owner, you had accomplished so many things.
Well, it sounds almost too good to be true, Dave. And it was. That's the crazy part here. And that's what this is all about, this Studcast number 300. It's not just a turning point as a number, but it's also a turning point in my life in June of 1979. Crazy, but that's exactly what it was. So in today's 300 episode, we're going to open the door, man, to the biggest heartbreak of my wrestling career. We're going to talk again. And we're getting in more depth and getting further along here. We're going to talk about the heartbreak in my career of the Knoxville War. And today we're going to begin the journey where I finally found out what was happening, what was coming, what was in the future. And that had been in the works for a long time. This intrigue and all these things going on behind my back, I was able to find out, and we'll talk about it in this episode.
Wow, I think this is the one we've all been waiting for, Ron. Last Studcast ended with you firing Bob Roop, your Knoxville booker, and giving him a 2-week notice to leave the territory. It was on the same day as you were wrestling Harley Race in a Texas death match, of all things. A match you described beautifully in the last Studcast, by the way. You said there was another surprise coming in this Studcast. So what was the surprise? Are you going to spill it now?
Yeah, well, after I fired Bob, man, he went back to his apartment. And he had been living, oddly enough, with Dick Slater. And Slater had been to Japan about 6 weeks earlier than this time frame. And when he came back, he started living with Roop again. And so Roop went back, and obviously he was upset about being fired. And he sat down with Dick Slater and told him everything. everything that was going on, all their plans. So, and Slater, at this point, he knew absolutely nothing about any of it until that day, until Roop went and told him.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the bad thing for Roop is he wasn't aware that Dick Slater and I had been best friends for 9 years.
Yes, as evidenced by these Studcasts, you've been talking about that relationship for a while. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, we'd basically been friends since November of 1970, 9 years earlier. The first week I arrived in the Florida territory, I met Dick Slater. Dick was best friends with Mike Graham. Mike Graham's dad was Eddie Graham and owned the territory. And Mike and Dick were in high school together. And that's where Slater, along with some training that I did with him, became a wrestler in the early 1970s. So Dick Slater was very honest. He was an extremely honest guy and a loyal friend, obviously, and one of the most dangerous men on the planet. I better throw that in too. I mean, he did have an attribute there that, I knew nobody else that was better than Dick Slater, I don't believe.
Sure.
And as soon as Root told him the entire plan, Slater got in his car and he drove straight to my house and he sat down and told me everything. So
wow.
So I basically fired Bob Roop as the Southeastern Knoxville booker, and the same day I learned everything that was going on from my best friend Dick Slater.
Wow. So you finally found out everything. And on the same day that you were going to be wrestling Harley Race in a Texas death match. So I'm sure Roop, since he told Dick Slater everything, must have told his 4 future partners that he had been fired. Dealing with all of this, it must have been a pretty stressful night for you at the matches. Plus, again, Harley Race, the baddest man on God's green earth, the next night in the Gulf Coast territory. So how did you handle all that?
Well, before I left for that Gulf Coast match, I had obviously a lot to take care of, man. I was going to have to hire a new booker. I was going to have to set up that night's card with the booker because I'd already fired my present booker. I was going to be putting together the TV show for 2 days later that was going to promote the next Friday night, the June 1st, 1979 Coliseum event. And I was going to have to do all of that before I left town.
So are you saying you did all of that in one afternoon?
I did, yes. Basically, I did all that in one afternoon.
Wow.
So what I did is, and the way it happened is, Slater and I had such a great relationship. He'd been in the business for almost 9 years. He had been all over the world wrestling. He had seen everything. He had done it all. And so I just said, Dick, why don't I just make you my booker? Because I had to have a booker anyway.
Right,
so he's told me about this, and I said, I'm going to make you the booker, man. So I told him, he was going to be my booker, and right then we sat down. He was there anyway, and we talked about the matches for that night, that coming night, what we're going to do on that night. We talked about the entire TV show for 2 days later, and 2 days later he was going to be handling the TV. So Slater went back to Roop's apartment, acting as if nothing had happened. He didn't want to let Roop know. There was no need to let Roop know, right? So finally, man, I had the upper hand. I now knew what was going on. And the Roop troop, I think I'm going to start calling that group, didn't know. They didn't know that I knew anything.
Wow. So, okay. So, and maybe this is a side note. Dick Slater had been in the business so long, not just anybody could be a booker, but you had plenty of confidence that he could.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had seen everything. He'd handled finishes in his own matches at this point, 9 years in, and he could handle finishes in other matches. Wow. And I thought he was very qualified.
All right. So what happened at the Coliseum that night? I know a lot was building up to this point.
Well, I kind of gathered everybody in the crew up as soon as I got there and got them all together. And the Coliseum had 2 huge dressing rooms, one for the baby faces, one for the heels. I brought them all into the baby face dressing room, except for Harley. I didn't mention the Harley. Didn't have Harley in the meeting. Was no need to. And first thing I did, and Bob Roop's in that room too, along with everybody else. And I told everybody that Bob Roop's no longer the booker here, that he's being replaced immediately by Dick Slater. And Dick acted as though he was surprised.
Ooh.
As surprised as everybody else was to hear that Dick had been slipped right into Bob Roop's spot.
Okay, so you had already verbally given Roop his 2-week notice. So did Roop and his troop, did they wrestle as scheduled for that night?
Yeah. They were unaware that I knew what was going on. So, they didn't jump to do anything. I'm sure they were going to wait and go back and talk about it after the night was over. Like, wow, what do we do, man? So they only knew that I had fired Roop, his buddies and everybody in the crew. So I flew out to Alabama the next day as I was, going to wrestle Harley in a world title match that night in Dothan. So then I also flew back to Knoxville on the Saturday morning after the Dothan matches because I wanted to make sure that Dick Slater didn't have a problem with these guys at the TV that day. I wanted to have backup, man, just in case that I didn't know what was going to happen. And at this point, they didn't know what was going to happen.
You want to talk about kind of peeling the curtain back and seeing what's behind and revealing stuff like this. This is the kind of information, the behind the scenes wrestling history, I think listeners love, and they hardly get the real what was going on behind the scenes story. So to me, that's what makes these Studcasts so popular. So how about the TV show 2 days after the night you had fired Bob Roop? And how about the card for Knoxville, Friday, June 1st, 1979? I'm anxious to see how all this was going to fall into place for you.
Well, let's start with the card. The first match was Mr. Fuji, who was now in the Memphis territory. But on this night, he's going to be managed again by Ron Wright. He hadn't been over there for just a couple of weeks, and he was going to be wrestling against Terry Gibbs. Dr. D, David Schultz, and Eddie Mansfield, who had come out of the Gulf Coast, both of them now were teamed up in a great team, by the way. They faced off against Ken Lucas and Dean Ho. Jimmy Golden, also in the Memphis territory at this point. He's in there that night, and he's going to be wrestling against Kevin Sullivan. I was on the card against the great Malenko. And then in the bunkhouse match, tag match, that's where the contestants could wear Western boots, man, and use them on their opponents any way they wanted to. So everybody had boots on, man. And the new champions, Dick Slater and Crusher Blackwell, and you can imagine being booted around by 450-pound Crusher Blackwell. They met the former champions, Bob Roop and Bob Orton Jr. The main event was a special 2 out of 3 Fall Southeastern Championship match. The champion at this point was the new Russian, Alexis Smirnov. He was managed that night by the great Malenko against Ronnie Garvin, who was managed by Crusher Blackwell.
All right, to me, that's a pretty strong card, Ron, with all that was happening behind the closed doors and the whole situation. So what happened on the TV that set this card up? How was that?
Well, Dick Slater and Crusher Blackwell got a win in the first television match of that day. Kevin Sullivan won the second TV match. I was on the personality profile, and the reason was we had this tremendous Texas death match finish in the 2 nights earlier. And so Les and I, and it was one of the only matches that was recorded. So I took the personality profile with Les, and, we sat there and watched this outrageous bump that Harley had taken at the end of the match, where he dived headfirst through that table on the outside of the ring. That finish was one of the best I have ever seen. And it exploded the TV audience when they watched it happen again. All of them, practically everybody came to TV, went to the matches the night before. So they were there 2 nights before they watched this happen then. And when they watched it on video, they reacted just like they did there. It's like, the whole studio goes, oh, wow, like they'd never seen it. So I can only imagine what was happening in those thousands and thousands of homes out there. People watching this bump had no idea what was coming. So David Schultz, Eddie Mansfield, they got another win in the third match. And because it was the last week in the May rating book, the last match was for the TV championship trophy. Ronnie Garvin had won the trophy from Bob Roop 3 weeks earlier in one of those matches in which Garvin put up his Southeastern belt, Roop put up his TV trophy, and the winner of that match got both. Well, Garvin had won that match 3 weeks earlier. So Garvin was defending against the guy that was now the Southeastern champion, Alexis Smirnoff. And Smirnoff had beaten him for the belt 2 weeks earlier. Basically, it was a main event match on TV because it was rating period. So with outside interference, from the great Malenko, who, was there at the studio, wasn't on anything else, wasn't seen anywhere else. With that outside interference from great Malenko, he was going to be in Smirnoff's corner the following Friday night. The TV trophy was won by Smirnoff.
Okay,
so now Garvin is no longer the TV champion.
Gotcha. Okay, all right. So maybe I'm wrong, Ron, but I couldn't help but notice Bob Roop, Bob Orton Jr., and Ron Wright. Were they not on this TV? Ronnie Garvin lost another title to the new Russian Alexei Smirnoff in addition to that.
No, Dave, you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 wrestlers planning to take over Southeastern were not a factor on this TV. Wonder why. So it may be that the new booker was going to make some changes, or maybe he wasn't even going to have to make any changes.
Wow. All right, so what happens on June 1st, 1979, Knoxville Coliseum?
Mr. Fuji won his match against Terry Gibbs. David Schultz and Eddie Mansfield won over Ken Lucas and Dean Ho. Jimmy Golden and Kevin Sullivan had a match that was declared a no contest. Actually, Jimmy got nasty, almost half heelish in this match with Kevin Sullivan, and they got into a little brawl out there on the floor that nobody expected, and they were both counted out. So it was a no contest match. I beat the great Malenko in my match. Dick Slater and Crusher Blackwell, they got the best of Bob Roop and Bob Orton Jr. in the bunkhouse match, man. And wow, that was pretty nasty. I think about 3 out of the 4 of them were bleeding when that was over. And then in the main event, which was the best 2 out of 3 fall Southeastern Championship match, Ronnie Garvin regained the Southeastern belt with a win over Alexis Smirnoff. But this match was not supposed to have ended up that way, with Garvin winning. So what happened is, each one of those guys won a fall, and then they went back for the third and deciding fall. And Garvin went for a pin on Smirnoff, close to the Malenko's corner, and the referee started to count Smirnoff out. He was supposed to kick out. Smirnoff was going to kick out. He was going to win the match. But as the referee was about to count 3, Smirnoff was about to kick out, Malenko jumped up in the edge of the ring and laid on top of his feet. The Russian couldn't kick out. And the referee had to count him out. So Ronnie Garvin was awarded the Southeastern belt. Now, that don't sound like much of a deal, but that little mistake was going to come back to haunt me for the rest of the Knoxville War, man. And I think I'll explain that next Studcast because that's a pretty long explanation there.
Okay. I got to hear that one. All right. So how about attendance then, Stud? How did you do that night as far as the crowd?
Well, the crowd was down about 800 from the 5,100 that was there on that Texas Death Match card with Harley, which was amazing. That's the one I really, on a Thursday night, didn't expect we might do very well with, but we almost sold out the building again. So before we take the break, though, Dave, and I think we're probably getting close, I've been thinking lately about how big and good our Southeastern crews were before the war began. I want to talk about it now because everything is going to change in these studcasts, especially concerning the talent, starting with the very next one, as a matter of fact. So I'd like to pay tribute to the total number of stars that we had at the end of May in 1979 as a company and recognize each one of those guys. So in the southeastern Knoxville territory was Alexis Smirnoff, Ronnie Garvin, Dick Slater, Crusher Blackwell, Bob Orton Jr., Bob Root, the great Malenko, Kevin Sullivan, David Schultz, Eddie Mansfield, Ken Lucas, Dean Ho, Ron Wright, and Terry Gibbs. Now that's about as good a full-time 14-man crew as anybody in the country had.
Oh, for sure.
That's just in Knoxville.
Wow.
So let's talk about who was in southeastern Gulf Coast. Obviously, it was Terry the Hug Boulder, Ox Baker, Affa and Sica Anoy, the Samoans.
Wow.
Ricky Fields, Terry Latham, Ron Slinker, Austin Idle, the Gladiator, Dick Steinborn, Roy Lee Welch, Herb Calvert, the Wrestling Pro, Tarzan Baxter, Billy Spears, and I got to throw in Bob Armstrong, who wasn't there, but by golly, he was always a part of that down there. And, I have to throw him in.
Yeah.
So that's a very good 15-man crew, just about as good as anywhere in the country.
Easily.
And then to add to that, I want to recognize those wrestlers that were in the Memphis territory that we had sent there from Southeastern. And, they had been, all of those guys had at one time or another been Southeastern stars before they went to Memphis. And we're talking about the Mongolian Stomper, Gorgeous George Jr., my brother, Robert, Tor Tanaka, Mr. Fuji, Jimmy Golden, Don Carson, the Assassin Randy Colley, Rip Smith, Tony Charles, Buzz Sawyer, Punk Rock Wayne Ferris, Robert Gibson, and Mike Stalling. 14 more of the sports best.
Wow.
So, that was a total of 43 great wrestlers that had been stars in the first 5 years of Southeastern Wrestling's existence from 1975 through the middle of 1979.
Wow.
So, this Studcast is not only the record number of 300, but the total size of these three Southeastern crews was the largest number of wrestlers in Southeastern ever in its history. 43 guys in the first 5 years of that company. 43 of probably, I'd say, 80% some of the best in the country.
Oh, no doubt. And what folks may not remember is you loaned a bunch of these guys, as you mentioned, all the Memphis territory. Were those folks still working for you, but just on loan to Memphis?
Well, they had, if you asked those guys, Dave, they would all say, Ron, I'm working for you.
Right.
They were actually working in the Memphis territory.
Yeah.
But they were being handled by my brother, as it had been for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so, nothing had changed between me and all those guys. They considered themselves to be Southeastern people, not Memphis stars and Memphis's territory people. So, that's a good question, though. Yeah, their allegiance was to Southeastern if there had been a problem. And basically, we're going to get to that, too, as this goes by.
Yeah, I would think so. Their allegiance, they're trying to hang on to you, Ron. And listen, I'm glad you did that because that's really amazing. A who's who of professional wrestling. And what a great first part of this Studcast. This is a good point to take a break. Let's do that. When we return, we're going to be headed south to a territory that is on fire, Southeastern Gulf Coast. That is coming up when this Studcast continues. Hey, Studcast fans, Ron's Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel is just like his territories in 1979, on fire. New Ask the Stud 5 question and answer show is off to the best start yet for these historical wrestling gems of a show. The questions are absolutely astounding, and his answers even more so. The only place you can find these is YouTube Southeastern Rewind. All you have to do is subscribe, and they're free. Go to his Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud Facebook page, like him and follow him there, and you can even leave your own question there too. Subscribe, sit back, and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud. All right, Studcast fans, after an eye-opening part one of this Studcast, now we mount up again as we take a break, and we ride into a southeastern territory, much different than the one we were just in Knoxville. All right, so how does it feel, Stud, when we get down south compared to what was going on in southeastern Knoxville? Had to be a whole different vibe.
Well, man, it was like the difference between night and day, man. You know, all that intrigue and drama going on up there in Knoxville was replaced by the optimism and the laughter in the dressing rooms down south in southeastern Gulf Coast. Louis Tillett had done a masterful job in the southeastern Gulf Coast territory, especially compared to Bob Rooft's partial destruction of what had been a phenomenal territory when I gave him the job, since he had gotten the job. So this is going to be a lot of fun compared to the first part of this Studcast, what we're going to get into here. So let's start the second part by going back to the last Friday night card of May 25th, 1979. It was the night I was supposed to be wrestling Harley Race for the NWA World Title match. And I just want to kind of remind fans of this because it will build toward what's going to happen in the rest of this Studcast. So maybe we should start with the match that was right before this world title match I was supposed to have. And that match was the Hulk against the Continental Wrestling Federation champion, Thunderbolt Patterson. So Terry the Hulk Boulder, and he made a point of, again, Spears had him announced as Sterling Golden, and again he stopped the announcer and said, "No, sir, you got to do it over. I'm Terry the Hulk Boulder." And then he sent Spears back to the dressing room just like he had for the week before. You know, he said, "Get out of here. Get your butt to the dressing room," right? So, you know, but it didn't change the outcome, however, because Spears came back to the ring just like he had the week before when Hulk was wrestling me. And Hulk had me beat. I was in his bear hug, and Spears wanted to hit me with something in his fist, and he made him drop the bear hug, put him into full Nelson, and then I ducked and bang, he hit the Hulk, and I beat the Hulk, so caused Hulk to lose. So in this match again this night, you know, I was watching this match because it was right before my match with the NWA champion Harley, and Hulk, heel since his arrival in the Gulf Coast, stood at the huge crowd. You know, there was a huge crowd, man, all around me, and then when Crazy Billy comes back again, and he has Hulk's got Patterson in his bear hug. Billy makes him drop the bear hug, and he goes to do something to him, and the second time in a row ends up getting Hulk beat. So, you know, so now the Hulk is really mad. You know, he sent him to the dressing room 2 weeks in a row. He comes back and he changes. He makes Hulk do what he wants him to do, and it costs Hulk the match. Wow. So Hulk at this point he's just really right up in his face. And the people in the building are going nuts. They want him to do something, and he just reaches down and puts Billy Spears in that bear hug. And that building exploded. Man, I mean, they've been wanting to see that for a long time. So the two giant Samoans, man, Southeastern Tag Champions, they were in the back of the building back there, and they were watching the match like I was. So they see what's going on, and heck, they got to come save the Billy Spears. He's Hulk's guy. He's crushing him. So, the building was already on their feet. And, boy, they exploded, man. When the two big boys got to the ring, Hulk just dropped spears. And they came in, and he just started wailing on them big boys, man. I mean, he was kicking some butt.
Wow.
He was really holding his own, man. But he hadn't considered that there's another bigger guy in the dressing room. Ox Baker.
Oh, yeah.
So Ox slides down to the ring, and he sneaks in behind Hulk while Hulk is kicking butt, and he nails him from behind. So once he does, then Spears kind of gets back on his feet, and all four of them start putting the boots to Hulk, man.
Wow.
In fact, they busted him open. They got him bleeding. First time I'd ever seen him bleed.
That had to be a combined. Oh, I'm sorry. That had to be a combined weight. 2 Samoans and 1 Ox Baker. How much you think?
Oh God, man, 900 pounds.
Oh, easy. Probably so.
Maybe
Wow.
close to 1,000, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, they're all over 300.
Yeah.
God. So there, there's over 1,000 pounds of humans beating, stomping Hulk through the mat.
Yeah.
And then he starts bleeding. So, and Hulk and I had been wrestling each other now for weeks, but I can't stand there. I'm standing there and I'm trapped at this point. But then I wasn't really trapped because I wasn't going to watch 4 guys do that to him. I mean, I can't let that happen. So I went to the ring, man, and the building, it got even louder. And once I got there, I got them all 4 of them off of it. I threw Spears out into the floor, and then Ox Baker finally managed to get around while I'm working on the other 2, and he nailed me from behind. Now he kind of did the same thing he had done to the Hulk, except he went further with it. He got my left arm, he put it behind me, he reached around my body with his other hand, got that arm, and then he hit me, man, with what most wrestlers were describing in the dressing rooms, and when they talked about Ox Baker, he hit me with what they called the killer heart punch. And boy, my lights went out. Wow. I mean, he knocked me unconscious. So I still to this day think that, they should have never let him ever hit anybody after he'd hit those 2 guys that died.
Wow.
So several wrestlers of the baby faces, Ricky Fields and Terry Latham and, guys that were in the early matches came down to the ring. But Hulk just pushed him aside. And he picked me up like I was a little baby, literally. And that building was just as crammed as it was for the Andre match about 3 weeks earlier, just wall to wall. And he carried me through the crowd back to the dressing room. So then minutes later, Harley comes down to the ring. They ring the bell for the main event. And there he stands with his NWA belt alone in the ring. And I wasn't able to go back and wrestle in the match. I just, got my stuff half together again. And so I hear Race get on the microphone, and he tells the crowd that he's willing to defend his belt against any man in the other dressing room, and he'll let Ron Fuller pick him. So I'm standing there, or, at that point I'm on my feet, and I look, and there's the Hulk standing face to face with me. He's still bleeding. He's trying to get his eye to stop the blood. Yeah. So Hulk, I look at him, man, eye to eye, and I say, you got it, kid. Go beat Harley Race.
Wow.
So the crowd didn't know who was going to come. So when the Hulk came around the corner in that old building, big farm center, that building stood up. I mean, wow. They didn't expect the Hulk. He'd be the last one they would expect. So then Harley left the ring, and he took his belt, and he went back to the dressing room with it. Then he came back to the ring without it, right? And then he got the microphone again, and he refused to defend his belt against the Hulk because the Hulk's name's not on the contract. I'm supposed to be wrestling Ron Fuller.
Right.
So he changed his mind. I'll wrestle anybody for the belt that Ron picks.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and says, no, not you, basically.
Yeah.
Anybody but you.
Yeah.
You know? And it was a wise decision for race because, you know, the Overflow building, man, they're all on their feet at this point. And when they rang the bell, that building carried old Hulk, man. I mean, they got him all fired up. And then Hulk got Harley in his bear hug. And Harley refused to submit. The referee raised his arm, and he kept it in there 2 or 3 times. And then finally, Harley passed out. His head fell on the Hulk's shoulder, and he was gone. Referee picked his hand up 3 times, and it just fell. And he rang the bell. He raised the Hulk's hand. Hulk had beaten the world champion, man.
Wow.
And the crowd carried Hulk back to the dressing room. I'll never forget, man. You know, they got him on their shoulders and they just carried him out of there. Wow, what a scene it was.
Okay, and I can't wait to hear because I know this is gonna pick up again. I can't wait to hear about that. All right, an incredible description of the events of the Friday before, Stud. That night, all of this had been recorded and was going to be shown back the next day on TV, I think. So before you tell us about the TV show, can you give us that upcoming card for the next week for Montgomery, Mobile, and Dothan? Because the card was typically the same in all 3 markets, right?
Yeah, most of the time it was. So, all right, we're talking about the card that's going to be basically on June the 1st. The same as the Knoxville card that's going on up north.
Yeah.
So the opening match had 2 newcomers in it. It had a kid named Ken Griffin, pretty nice looking kid, and pretty good wrestler. But he was wrestling against, man, one of the greatest tag teams ever. He was wrestling against one of those world famous Infernos, man. So we had another good heel that had arrived. Mm-hmm. Herb Calvert was still accepting challenges for his $500. And, if anybody beat him, they'd get the $500. And then he was going to be facing Eddie Sullivan, managed by Billy Spears. Roy Lee Welch was going to be taking on the Gladiator, who was managed by Billy Spears. Then the Southeastern, Ron Slinker was going to be defending his Southeastern belt against Austin Idol. Idol was been there about 2 weeks, and wow, was he getting over. He was really, really getting over fast. Wow. The Southeastern tag belts were on the line. The champions, the Samoans, they're again managed by Billy Spears, were against, that really popular team, Ricky Fields and Terry Latham, man. Fans just never turned on them. Fans always wanted to see it. They didn't care if they lost all of them. I don't ever understood how they were over that good. Then the main event was 2 of the sport's biggest competitors, man. You got the 6 foot 8 inch, 300-pound Terry the Hulk Boulder against the 6 foot 6 inch, 330-pound Ox Baker.
All right, that's an incredible card, and the first time the Hulk would be seen as a baby face. All right, you had flown out the morning of this TV to be in Knoxville for Dick Slater's first TV show as the new Knoxville booker. So I know both Charlie Platt and Louis Tillett told you what happened on the Gulf Coast TV show Saturday, May 26, 1979.
Oh, yeah, you can bank on it, man. I mean, as soon as it was over, man, I got to talk to both of them. So after the Harley and Hulk match was over and the dressing room cleared, this is on the night before that I left to fly out. Louis and I had a chance to talk. The dressing room is nobody there but Louis and I. And we talked about the Gulf Coast TV show, the one he was going to do the next day. And then after we finished talking about that, I told him about what Dick Slater had found out and what was going on in Knoxville. He was just blown away. He was like, Ron, it's unbelievable. You can't be telling the truth, right?
Wow.
And I told him, under the circumstances, obviously, Louis, you need not expect me to come back down here for a while. I think I'm going to be hooked up down the, up there to to try to save my territory.
Right. Yeah.
So, and he understood just as I did how important. And then at the last thing we talked about the TV is putting something good on it, something really good on it. So, and he understood the importance of that because it's during the TV rating period. So, so here's what happened. On the next TV, the next day, while I was back in Knoxville, Charlie Platt told me that the TV studio first, he said it was packed, Ron. He said 3 times more people was turned away from the studio than could fit in there.
Wow.
Because everything was so hot at this point. You had the Hulk and you had Andre. You've had these big, huge crowds. And now they're coming to fill the studio just like they were filling the building. So the Gulf Coast show TV show had 2 championship matches on it. It opened up with one and it closed with one. The first match, championship match, was a TV championship and a trophy match because the new champion, the new TV champion, and brought his trophy in, was the Gladiator, managed by Billy Spears. And he was in the ring against the newcomer, Ken Griffin. And Louis told me, later that Griffin looked really good in the match. He was going to be good. He was going to do a good job there. But he certainly wasn't the equal of Dick Steinborn, man, who was the Gladiator under the mask. I mean, Steinborn was one of the great workers ever. Then the second match featured the powerful Southeastern Tag Champions, man, the Big Samoans, managed by Billy Spears. Ricky Fields and Terry Latham sat with Charlie at the set. They talked about how powerful these Pacific wrestlers. They called them the Pacific wrestlers because these guys were related to the Rock.
Yeah.
And they are in the Rock's family, in that bloodline.
Yeah.
And, they talked about how big these guys were and how tough they were and how strong they were. And then they ended up by making a bunch of jokes with Charlie Platt about the mama boy manager, Billy Spears. Too bad they got a mama boy manager. It'd be great if they had somebody else, right? Even better. So the personality profile was done live. And Charlie's guest, obviously, was the new Southeastern star, Terry the Hulk Boulder. And when he came out of the dressing room to go to the set, Charlie said that studio went crazy, man. He's like, wow. He said he never seen anybody get over like that. He was really, really on fire. And so Hulk, was patched up because he had been bleeding. The first time he'd ever bled was the night before. And so he sat there with a patched up eye, and he watched this historic video from the night before. It was truly a historic video. I mean, and it started after his championship match with Thunderbolt Patterson, and he had the argument with Spears, and then it showed him get the bear hug on Spears. It showed the Samoans come to the ring. It showed Ox Baker get him from behind. It showed, me getting down there and Ox getting me and giving me the heart shot. Wow, it was a tremendous video, man. And it carried, then it showed the Hulk carrying me back through the massive crowd back to the dressing room.
Wow.
Charlie said the studio was erupting, man, during the profile so often and so loud. He said he couldn't hear the Hulk's responses. They couldn't hardly talk because they're sitting right there next to one set of those bleachers.
Yeah.
So when the second video started, Harley Race was already in the Hulk's bear hug. They went ahead then and showed the piece of Harley's match. And it showed the Hulk with the bear hug on him. And Charlie said he had to wait for the TV's crowd response to die before he could ask Terry hardly anything about how that felt to have to accomplish what he'd done. Then Charlie finished the profile by saying the Hulk was now the uncrowned world champion.
Wow.
Basically, he was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He didn't have the belt, but he had obviously beat the world champion with his bear hug.
I remember watching this TV show. At this point in time, I was just getting into broadcasting, and so I wasn't always able to go to the matches, but I definitely remember this TV show and Charlie saying exactly that. In fact, he mentioned it on almost every TV show You know, Charlie, for a couple of months after that, just as a reminder, until Hulk finally got a real shot at Harley's belt.
You know, I doubt any wrestler in history, Dave, ever got a better build-up for a world title match, a rematch with the world champion, than what Terry Boulder got that night, the night before this TV. So Harley put him over right in the middle of the ring, man. And 2 months later, they're going to meet again in a football stadium this time. No building's going to hold it. It's too big for anything in Dothan. And it's going to barely, then the football stadium's barely going to hold all the fans. Going to be a tremendous event. But the profile didn't end with that. Charlie asked the Hulk, what his feelings were about his upcoming match with that big monster, Oscar Baker. And then that left that left me unconscious the night before, and the worldwide reputation of being a possible killer of wrestlers. I mean, there was a little discussion at the very end of this that was going to cover this upcoming match, the first one ever, between the Hulk and Ox Baker. So, Charlie said Terry answered very well everything they had asked him. For someone, he told me, he said, Ron, for a guy that had not been doing his own interviews because Billy Spears did all his talking, he said he was unbelievable. And he said, I asked him about all this, about what are you going to do about Ox Baker and all of that, and are you scared? Basically, a little bit of that. And he said something like, I know it was a tough sport before I ever got into it, and that people sometimes get hurt and sometimes very bad. But he said, but pain goes both directions. He said, he's probably going to give me some pain, but when I get him in my bear hug, he said, I can't imagine him being any tougher than Harley Race. And everybody just saw how I beat the NWA world champion. So I think I can beat Ox Baker.
Wow. Well, I remember after that interview was over, my first thought was this guy is going to be one of the most famous wrestlers ever in Southeastern Gulf Coast. And not to mention, I had no idea he would eventually become a Hall of Famer, but we should have all known. I believe in the next 10 years or so, he turned out to be much, much bigger than even that. So how about the next match immediately after that very important profile?
Well, man, what do you do after that? You bring the monster himself to the ring.
Exactly.
You're talking about the 6'6", 330-pound Ox Baker. Wow, and was he ugly? I mean, he was scary. So it didn't take long, man, for him to annihilate a young wrestler. Charlie says, Ron, I felt so sorry for the kid. He said he must have kicked him in the face 5 times, and and that was one of Ox's first television matches. So what an impact he made, man. And he said, wow, he really truly looked like one of the most fearsome men on earth. So the TV closed with another championship match, okay? It had opened with a championship match, and it closed with one. And in this one, the Southeastern champion, Ron Slinker, was defending against one of Billy Spears' men, Eddie Sullivan. So Austin Idol was on this card that was coming up to get his first chance at the Southeastern title. But, Austin Idol was you didn't control Austin Idol very much, and he couldn't wait to get his normal shot. So during this match between Slinker and Eddie Sullivan, Austin Idol just hit the ring. He threw Sullivan out of the ring, and he put his figure 4 leg lock on Slinker. Right. Obviously the referee stopped the match, and he raised Slinker's hand. He disqualified Spears and his man, but Idol didn't care. He was a lunatic sometimes, and so the show ended with Idol and Slinker, man, with an interview. Slinker's mad, He goes, "Well, what kind of guy are you to sneak in the ring, And Idol says, basically, I don't care, man. You're going to get beat. I'm getting that belt. So there was a great show of it.
Hey, I tell you what, I know it ended as a great TV show following an incredible night of matches from the night before, especially. So how about the card you gave us earlier? It made its rounds the following week, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the new Inferno, man, he got his win, and his first win over Ken Griffin. Herb Calvert, who had beaten every challenger from the audience for months. None of them, man, had ever come close to winning, and he didn't have any challengers at all for the entire week. So Herb had convinced everybody that, there's no need in going up there and getting in the ring with that guy. You're not going to win. So, and then after it was over, he went on, he extended his winning streak. He beat Eddie Sullivan in all three of the cities. Then the Gladiator got another win over Roy Lee Welch, which he had several of them over Roy. And then in the Southeastern Championship match between the champion Ron Slinker and Austin Idol, Idol got himself disqualified, man. He just got too crazy. He did something so outlandish that the referee just rang the bell. He said, "That's it, no more." And so, Idol did not get the belt. So Southeastern Tag Champions, the Samoans, managed by Billy Spears, they won again against Fields and Latham. And again, in all three cities, the fans didn't care. They gave Fields and Latham a standing ovation at the end of every one of those matches.
Wow.
So the main event was the wild one, man, of the night. Ox Baker, obviously managed by Billy Spears, and Terry Boulder. Both of them got carried away, man. And not only did they knock the referee down, but they knocked the referee out cold. And so there was nobody out there. They were going at it. The referee was laying off to the side of the ring, and the wrestlers started coming from both dressing rooms. The wrestlers are going to have to stop these. If that happens, that's the only thing that can happen that can stop it. So both dressing rooms came down to the ring, and they kind of pulled them apart. But next week, they were going to be coming back. Same two, Ox against Boulder. But this time we're going to have the wrestlers at the ring before they start the match. We have a lumberjack match.
Yeah, there you go. Do you remember, was it Larry Brock, the referee at the time?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Did you take him? Did he go to Montgomery and Mobile for matches? Did he do those also?
He went and did a lot of the Montgomery matches. He did some Mobile matches as well. Larry Brock is going to, that's great that you brought him up, Dave. You probably don't know this, but Larry Brock is going to get into an angle in Montgomery in which he's going to be involved in a match, in a couple of matches in Montgomery.
Wow. Okay.
So, Larry Brock was one of the greatest referees in the business. And, he wasn't just a great referee. He could have been a little star, man.
Yeah. And he's so much fun to be around. He's just a fun guy. I've been friends with his sons for a long time. And we talk occasionally on Facebook, but Larry's a great guy. He's retired, obviously. Anyway, listen, this sounds like another great night for fans. So what about attendance in all three major cities for the Hulk's first night as a babyface?
Okay, well, this is pretty cool. I mean, Knoxville was like, considerably down, just in the fours. Montgomery had 4,300 people. Mobile sold out Expo Hall, and they turned away. Roy told me they probably turned away 2,000 at least.
Wow.
It had 5,600. That's what that building would hold. It had 5,600. And some nights when Fire Marshal wasn't there, you might get it to 58 or something. But that was really wall to wall in that building.
It reminds me of stories. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then Dothan finished with 5,200, man. Another 5,000 plus.
Wow. When you're talking about turning fans away, it goes back to me, to Studcast from years ago, where your father was booking such matches, and your grandfather even, maybe in baseball stadiums where hundreds or thousands were lined up down the streets that would be turned away. So that's to me, there you go again. following in those footsteps. All right, Ron, so you just keep on doing it week after week. I get the feeling the Tennessee territory was about to explode, maybe in a bad way, and the Gulf Coast territory definitely in a good way. I really love these Studcasts. Absolutely a ton of fun.
So, speaking of loving it, Dave, that's exactly what's happening, man. On my Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel, fans have fallen in love with these Ask the Stud question and answer shows. And I bring this up because, this is the fifth one that I put out there now, and they're all over an hour long. And they're filled with all kinds of historic answers for fans from everywhere, literally in the country and outside the country. And so on my last one, I forgot to mention the date of the next one. So I wanted to make a point here toward the end of this show that, I want to give so it's a good time for me to get in the next for Ask the Stud number 6. It's going to be in the month of June. They're always on the third Saturday in the month, these question and answer shows.
Yeah.
And the next one's going to be on Saturday, June 17th.
All right, June 17th, that's a Saturday, and we'll try to remind folks as we get closer. And since you brought it up, fans loving something, guess what we have time for today?
Oh, you got to be kidding me. We got time for a learning tree question, man?
Even after all this, yeah, we do. And here it is. This one comes from India. That's right, Ron, definitely. Calcutta, India. I had no idea that they could hear your Studcast in India, of all places. All right.
Well, yeah, but you know why that is, Dave?
Why is that?
YouTube is a global network.
Well, yes, of course.
And now every Studcast is on YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. So we're seen basically around the world.
That's amazing. So Southeastern Rewind really is obviously your home for Studcast and everything else that is the Stud. All right, so I can't believe we're being heard around the world like this. I knew that you had listeners in Australia. So now from Calcutta, India, Sapan Saxvinya, and I know I butchered that, and I apologize, but he says, you may be surprised to know, but many here in India follow you. Why is it that your wrestlers don't seem to be happy when they are, yet want to take control rather than just leave?
Yeah, wow, what a good question. I mean, so yeah, I understand real quickly here, Mr. Sapan. What a name, man. Yep. Mr. Sapan, I believe that was his first name. Yeah, they weren't happy, and I think, I appreciate you contacting me, first of all, Mr. Sapan, and I also appreciate you're getting right to the point, man. And that's a great question. And when I'm unhappy, and I think about this, my wrestlers were unhappy, a few of them. They didn't have reason to be, in my opinion, but why didn't they just leave? I mean, wow, you cut to the point, sir. That's great, and so, and I thought, and when I'm unhappy, Dave, with something or somebody, like maybe a meal at the restaurant, I don't try to go back and take control of the kitchen or take over the business, right? Because of it. I simply walk away and I don't go back to the restaurant again. So, that's kind of what Mr. Sapan is saying here in a way. So obviously, Mr. Sapan, you grasp the simplicity of this situation very well, man. Normally, that was the way unhappy wrestlers left territories. That's the way it was usually done. If they didn't like it, they simply found another territory to work in and they left. So my situation was different because of mostly one wrestler out of these 5. And at least one of those wrestlers, he didn't seem to be happy, as you put it, was not like the other 4, though. Yeah, I think he had a reason, man, for being far beyond what the other 4 did. And it was going to be his second try. I don't think we've talked about this, Dave. It was going to be Bob Roop's second try to steal someone's business. I wasn't the first. I didn't know that until it happened. It was too late, but so the ringleader, Mr. Sapon, Bob Roop, other than just being greedy, wanting to own his own territory, I believe was also jealous, man, kind of jealous of what I had accomplished. I think the others without Roop's influence, if there hadn't been for Bob Roop's influence, I don't think that they would have taken the time. They would have thought about it and really considered how they'd been treated since they'd been there and the success they'd had working with me. And I don't think they would have never done this at all had it not been for Bob Roop. I think Bob Roop, who was wrestling in the Florida Territory long before I got there, and long after I left, actually, was extremely jealous of what I had done with my life in the 4 years since he had seen me. I've seen him in 4 years. He comes, I don't have just one territory, I got 2 territories, So he was after more than 10 years in the business, he was still just a wrestler and one with a bad attitude who never believed he was getting paid as much as he should be. So he allowed himself to let those beliefs affect his future, and I'm not making excuses for him, but he was basically unwilling to risk his financial future. That's basically what I did. He wasn't willing to risk his financial future to purchase somebody's territory, which is a man's way of doing things, but and then try to make a go of it himself. He would rather steal the business. In this case, the territory. So many out there, as I mentioned, probably not aware, and I didn't find out until it was too late, that this wasn't Bob Roop's first shot at stealing a territory, where he was the booker, and he had pinned the booker at Roy Shire's territory in San Francisco about 2 years earlier, before my territory, and he tried to steal that. So the bad part for Roop was the fact that my territory was his second attempt to steal one, and it also ended up in failure, just like the first time he tried to steal one. So I basically think, Mr. Sapon, the good Lord blesses those that work hard, make good things happen, and I think He punishes those that don't do things like a man should.
I think that's probably the best explanation of the Knoxville War that I've heard so far. I mean, simply put, I think that's it. So each one of these Studcast leave us with something special every week. So I think you did that again today, Ron. All right, how about next week? A few words about where we're riding next week.
Okay, southeastern Knoxville is going to begin to heat up, man, as the 1979 summer comes upon us on the next Studcast. Bob, the Roop Troop is going to make their first move, man. Everything's been fine in this Studcast. They went out, they did their thing in the ring. They except for the last match, they didn't do anything that they shouldn't have. So 5 wrestlers, are booked on the next show, but none of them are going to be at the Coliseum for the event they were going to be publicized on. But they are going to be there, but they're going to buy tickets, and they're going to sit in the crowd. They're going to try to promote their future product. They're going to try to intimidate and adversely affect the matches of a company that provided all 5 of them with a very good living since the day they came there. And it was just the beginning of the worst summer of my life, man. And men who I thought were my friends decided to try and steal what I'd built. And it's a sad story. That'll play out and over the next few months. And ultimately, it's going to end with the fans being the losers. Southeastern Gulf Coast, down there, everything was on a roll. We'll talk about that. Hook was getting over even stronger as a star. And Ox Baker and Austin Idol were really getting hotter as heels. And one of the great national stars, big time international star, basically, Bobo Brazil, is going to make his first appearance in Southeastern Gulf Coast. There's going to be a new tag team. The Dargon Twins are going to join in. It's going to become the territory that keeps me in professional wrestling. and develops into the smartest move I made in wrestling with the buy of the Gulf Coast territory.
Wow, that's awesome. Can't wait. And Studcast, again, they're all at tnstud.com. Whether you're listening to this one or the first one or the 100th or the 200th, this is number 300, by the way. Hey, listen, folks, go to Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud on Facebook. You can like and follow him there to become friends with a legend. On Twitter, same thing. Find him on Twitter, Ron Fuller Welch. Follow him there, too. Check out the website, tnstud.com, for every Studcast ever done. 43 super Studcasts. Regular Studcasts like this one usually average an hour or maybe a little more. Super Studcast up to 3 hours. And, of course, the Stud store is there, too, at tnstud.com. All kinds of souvenirs. Get your personally autographed copy of Ron's novel called Brutus. It is there as well. The YouTube channel, as we mentioned, Southeastern Rewind, it is red hot. Close to 300 hours of videos there now. At least 80 Studcasts, 52 Stud stories, 37 short rides with the Stud, and 5 Ask the Stud question and answer shows. Subscribe now at YouTube Southeastern Rewind. YouTube Southeastern Rewind is the gateway to ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, the Stud's tremendous streaming channel. Now, more than 250 hours of classic wrestling entertainment, Gulf Coast, Southeastern, Continental, and USA TV shows, all in the order which they were recorded. That's the way it's meant to be. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Plus, 19 chapters of Ron's audio version in Ron's voice of his best-selling lion novel, Brutus. 6 stars of the sport, 4 superstars of the past, and documentaries with something new every day. All this $4.99 a month or $39.99 per year, plus the free 1-week trial still available. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. It is the best deal in wrestling. Any final words, Stud?
Yeah, man. Obviously, I'd like to thank everybody for listening today. I hope everybody out there have enjoyed it. And please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.